أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدة الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين ورحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وشفيع ذنوبنا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا مولانا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل فرجه.
ثم الصلاة والسلام على آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس ويطهركم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل.
رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم وانطقني بالهدى. وقال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا صدق الله العظيم. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل فرجه.
My mothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Continuing with our topic of building strong Muslim families in changing times, wisdom from Quran and Ahl Bayt to navigate modern family life. Today, inshallah, is our 7th lecture in the series, and today we will be talking about our relationship with adult children, that is, children over the age of 21. We had talked about the Islamic parenting contract a couple of days ago, and we said that Islam, it's basically a contract, it's a divine contract between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it charges us with certain duties depending on the age of the children. And we said that the age of the children is divided into kind of 3 blocks of 7 years. In the first 0 to 7, 7 to 14, and then 14 to 21. And then after 21, the contract ends. And so today we will talk about what happens after the contract ends. And by the way, the contract, this is my language here, this is not Hadith, so, please don't quote it as Hadith. There have been a couple of questions related to this, so let's deal with that now. First of all, many people have this question, but somebody specifically asked that, I'm much more enlightened now than I was when my children were young. They're now over the age of 21. I didn't really know all of this. Now what? Okay. So my first response to that is, welcome to the club. Right? Many of us are in that same boat. We obviously, when we are young mothers, we don't know what we do now. And people who are just learning about it as they're starting their families are very lucky in a sense, because they will make different mistakes. Okay? It's not that they're not going to make mistakes, they will make different mistakes. One thing we have to remember is that, just us them being born in a Muslim family, there is a lot of protective factors already. We have to remember that. What do I mean by that? So, when in psychology and therapy, when we are assessing a family, we always look at the protective factors and risk factors. Okay? Risk factors are many, I won't go into that right now, but protective factors are things that, everything being equal, set the child up for success. So even when we don't know anything, what are some of the protective factors that we already have within our families? And that's important to remember because, mothers, we tend to have a PhD in guilting ourselves. Fathers do not have this problem, by the way. When I'm talking to families, it is very stark how differently, the parents are relating to the same issue, okay? So what this means is the fact that they are born into a Muslim family, the fact that they've probably gone to the mosque, they may even have gone to madrasa. You have been praying in front of them, you have been teaching them stuff. Yes, you don't know the theory, but you were doing the practice to the best of your ability. Does anyone do it perfectly? No. You know, the idea of, and I'm very conscious of this as a therapist, right? That when we are giving people kind of the blueprint or the theory, whether it is for couple relationships, marriage, family, parenting, the first thing mothers do is use that to guilt trip themselves. Right? Oh, I didn't know this, I didn't do this, I wish I had done it differently. But please stop. That is not going to help us. That will not make us better parents. We have to be real. Okay, maybe I didn't know. So one mother wrote to me and said, you know, you said that first 7 years we should just nurture the relationship between Allah and the child. And what I did, what I was taught was really focus on namaz at that time. Focusing on namaz is not a bad thing. Your child is not going to go off track because you focused on namaz in the first 7 years. It is okay if you didn't do things according to the blueprint. That is not what the blueprint is there for. You know, in anything, we always have like a bar or something we aim for, okay? We need, like, remember, coming back to the airplane, the pilot has a manifesto, he has a blueprint, he knows where he's going. Does he follow the plan? Most of the time, not. And the plane still lands okay. So similarly, our families, alhamdulillah, have a lot of built-in protective factors. Whether you are waking up now, or you did 5 years ago, or 15 years ago, or you're just starting out, it doesn't matter. Please, let's not waste any more time. I'll give you a short example. So, you know, when my kids were born, many of you know, I was raising family like far from my own family. I had very little support around me. And so that's kind of the reason why I really went into parenting and, you know, wanted to become a PhD on it to do everything right. And I remember picking up my kids from school one day and being in the car. And in my head, I'm literally planning how to be a good mom. That is what was going on in my head. Okay, I must do this and I must do this. So I read this book. And meanwhile, suddenly something, you know, kind of woke me up from that tunnel of self-absorption, which was my kids saying, "Mommy, Mommy," in the back seat. And that was such a waking up moment for me. So I was like, at this moment, I really don't need books. I don't need anything. I just need to turn my attention to my children who are in the car with me. You know what I mean? So that's why did we start by saying that Allah has set us up for success in any case? He's given us a child with an inborn fitrah. He has put the instinct of parenting within us. He has put a lot of things in place so that our children succeed. So please, you know, whatever is being said from here, you know, if you're using it for self-blame or guilt-tripping yourself, really reach out, because that's not the purpose. This is not to blame or shame anyone. Okay, Sarwa. So that's a very wise thing I started with, because today's conversation is going to be hard for many of us. Now, 21 years, the contract is over. Some of you are there already kind of struggling. Some of you have great relationships with children. Everything's working perfectly. And alhamdulillah, so how do we keep it that way? Okay. Now, after the relationship, after the contract is over, after your child has reached the age of 21, we have to remind ourselves that the child is their own moral agent. What does that mean? That they have achieved that status in life where we have discharged our duty, we've taught them what we need to, imperfectly as they might be, and now they are responsible for themselves. So coming back to the hadith, what does the hadith say? We know the first part. Second part says, so if he grows into a good character within 21 years, well and good. Otherwise, leave him alone, because you have discharged your responsibility before Allah. Now, leaving him alone, I know, is a very tough call for a lot of people, and we'll try to come to that, what that means. But basically, our relationship should change. You know how we said our first relationship is that of a protector, of a mentor, and then we become the disciplinarian, and then we become the consultant or the guide or the coach or however you want to put it, right? Now we have to change that into a relationship between adults. Now, what are some of the pitfalls that we see in relationships with older children? And this is just, you know, what I see in the society, what I've read about, what I see in my office. The first kind of common pitfall for parents of adult children is over-involvement. Now, many of us, we've all heard the term helicopter parents. We've heard that, right? Helicopter parent means what? Means actually hovering over the child, not letting them breathe kind of, and micromanaging every aspect of that. Now, if you've done that, while the children were young, this stage is going to be challenging for you, okay? If you've always kind of really been on top of their head, make sure that they're doing things right, whatever, this will be challenging, and all of these we've come back to. The second thing, which I'm not sure how much it's changing, but when I was growing up, and even my older kid generation, for example, we parents, South Asian parents, have this expectation of obedience. We have this expectation that children are meant to obey parents. How many of us believe that to be true as a matter of faith? Come on, be honest.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. Okay, and where do we get that idea from, that children have to obey the parent? Sorry? From our parents, okay. Where else? So our parents were theologians, or they were marjas, or what were they?
This culture.
Where did, yes, culture. Who are we all supposed to obey? Who are we all supposed to obey? Yes. You know, I used to hear this so much that I thought maybe I'm wrong. So I actually really went to the Quran and tried to find an ayat where it says that children must obey parents. It isn't there. Now I know, like, people are shocked. I love it. People are shocked because this is such a deeply held belief that we have. So Allah does talk about obedience to parents. What does He say? Do not obey them when they're trying to lead you away from faith. That is the time when the Quran talks about obedience to parents. What Allah does say is obey God, honor parents. Obey God, honor parents. And we'll really come to that. And by the way, young people, I will say this again. If you hear anything in a majlis and you use it against people, it will be the opposite of the intention. Opposite, okay? Your turn is coming. I'm speaking to you tomorrow, okay, inshallah. So just bear with me, okay? Bear with me. So expecting obedience, this is, and psychology has many terms for this. I'll come to that in a minute. The third thing is, we South Asian parents, and when I say South Asian, obviously I'm including East Africa and all of that, yeah? We are masters at taking things personally. Anything that our children do, we think it is a reflection on us. True? Now here's the thing. Can we control our children? Can we control a 21-year-old child? Okay, say they're still financially dependent on you, which we have come to. Say a 30-year-old child, a 35-year-old child. Can you control them? So do you think Allah in His justice would make you responsible for something you cannot control? Does that make sense? But we take it as an article of faith, right? If my child does something, and by the way, as a community, we really have to deal with this. We see somebody going off track. We first thing, from the member, amongst each other, what do? Mother blaming. Not parents, mother blaming. So mother's blaming herself, family's blaming her, kids are now blaming her, community is blaming her. Is that okay? And keep coming back to the prophet's example in, my 7-year-old told me this. When, like when I was a young parent, I used to we joke a lot in my family. So I would, if they would do anything that upset me, I would say, where have I gone wrong? Like typical Desi drama, okay? Where have I gone wrong? And I know my son told me once, Mother, don't give yourself such a hard time. Even Nabi Nuh couldn't control himself. Wise words. Wise words, right? Easier said than done. This is something, it's a practice that we have to keep reminding ourselves. The fourth pitfall that I see, and again we'll come back to it, is not setting clear boundaries for ourselves. As parents, we continue to overfunction beyond the age when children really should be responsible for themselves. If you are still micromanaging, still doing stuff which the child can do for themselves at 25, beyond, there is a problem. And who is the problem? Yes. And again, we'll come back to this. Okay? So we said what is actually expected from children towards parents is what Quran 17:23 tells us, and your Lord has commanded that you shall not worship any but Him, and goodness to your parents. You should obey, worship who? God, and goodness to your parents. And inshallah, we'll do this verse much more in detail tomorrow. The best gift we can give our children right from a very young age is what? That all of us in this house follow God. All of us, you and me both. Because when again in homes where there is a lot of issues and violence and abuse and all of that, children pick up on this dual kind of standard very, very quickly. And it doesn't help. It doesn't help the family, it doesn't help them, it doesn't help you. Okay. So if we are all, like, let's take the example of the phone or AI. All of us, the thing that parents come to most for support these days is what? Controlling AI, controlling technology. How do we control the phone? And I'll always ask them, what is your relationship with the phone? Right? How often are you on the phone? We cannot tell them to do something which we're not doing ourselves. Another distinction that we need to understand is who are we responsible to, and what are we responsible for? Responsible to and responsible for. Sounds like very close, but there is a big difference. We are responsible to our children, for sure. What are we responsible for? What the Hadith tells us, right? To guide, to model, to support, to teach them, to guide them, to stay present, everything within our circle of control. We are also responsible for healing our own generational traumas. We are also responsible for managing our own emotional world. Like we said yesterday, when mama's not happy, nobody's happy. If I am struggling to maintain my own emotional well-being, I owe it to my family to do something about it. I do not have to suffer alone. We are accountable to them for the world that we live in them, right? The environment, what are we doing? What is in our circle of control? Everything that's in our circle of control. What we are not accountable for, what we are not responsible for is outcomes. What they do, what their choice is, how they live their lives. We can grieve this and we'll talk about that, but we are certainly not responsible for it, okay? Now, once a child reaches the age of 21, it does not mean that our akhlaqi obligations to the children end. Even though they are not directly within our control, they are still what is called Zul Qarba, right? They are amongst our close family. They are fellow believers. They have many still rights upon us, but not in ways that we normally think about it. Now, what has actually complicated this idea a little bit is the idea of what we called, or what psychology has called, extended adolescence. Extended adolescence. Now, we know, everyone's heard this, the 30 is the new 20 and 40 is the new 30. What does that mean? That people are actually taking longer to mature. They are taking longer to stand on their own feet, so to speak. Now, here's the thing. Some of it can be traced back to us, and some of it cannot. The cost of living, in this day and age, if we do not help set up our children for housing, I don't understand how young people can afford housing now. It's almost impossible, right? So a lot of it is just financial, that they cannot. Many of them are studying more. They need to study more. They need at least 2 or 3 degrees to make it in this world, because by the time they finish 1 degree, their field is obsolete, right? So a lot of this is not in our control. However, there are some things which we can do to make sure that by the time, so again, when we are raising our children, we have to have this goal in mind, that I have 21 years to make or help or nurture this individual to live life as a contributing, self-sufficient individual. When we have that kind of a goal in mind from a very young age, then, if they're struggling at school, for example, we don't go and rescue them. We don't rescue them. Remember, we keep talking about the butterfly and the chrysalis, right? So now what happens, because of this reality in life, the fact that they are not able, for whatever reason, they are still dependent on us. Now, many Desi parents, right, we just think that that's normal. Great, kids are still living with us. However, as children grow up, they are in their 20s and beyond, even though they may be living with us, this is a stage of a lot of tension. A lot of tension, because the child is now an adult. They are fighting for independence. Whether they're living in the same house or not is irrelevant, actually. And one of the research that I did many years ago for some program that I was running was it was on intergeneration relationships, and it was about how different generations understand the same word. And I actually did surveys like from within the community and beyond about what does respect mean to you. Because, very often when we are living together, the basis has to be respect. We both respect each other. But here's the thing. Generations previously had a very different definition of respect. Respect meant what? Obedience. Exactly. Thank you. Do you think that the children today think of respect as obedience? Absolutely not. Their view of respect is I am I and you are you, and we respect each other's decisions. Everything that I do, Mama, is not about you. Right? How many of us have heard that? So this, we cannot really fix this. We have to navigate it. This is not like an instant solution. Okay, I heard one lecture, now it's fixed. No. This is something that you need to communicate about, talk about, discuss. And while you are doing that, I suggest that parents also have a clear idea of what their boundaries are. Because mothers, for example, from a very young age, right, who have never set boundaries, who actually don't know what the word boundaries mean. I know some older people who say this boundary, I don't understand what the boundary is, right? And it's true, they don't. They've never heard the word. So when you are arguing about a boundary, the older person has no idea what you're talking about, right? They're just thinking of exclusion, rejection, all of these things, okay? So, I would suggest before having these conversations in your home, you actually think about, this is your home, it is still your home. What can you live with? What can you not live with? And it's okay to have your own, kids are really good at boundaries. They have no problem.
Yeah.
For the mothers, this is something we have to learn. This is something we have to practice. This is something we have to say no. I'm actually not free that day to change my schedule to look after your kids even. I know I did a workshop once and some young people came up to me and said, you know, Auntie, you have to talk about how grandparents today are not supporting us. They're not looking after our children and they have their own lives. And I'm like,
It's not good.
yeah, and what's the problem with that? Here's the thing. As grandparents, we want to support our kids. Most people do. Let's put it this way. You know, let's face it. I know people once they have grandkids, like write them off because they're just so besotted they can't think of anything else. Okay, but if they still have a life of their own, they actually don't owe you that. They don't owe you that. If they are doing it, it is a favor. And thank them and appreciate it. Okay, their job is done. Okay, the contract is over. So we, you know, as we get older, we need to get more comfortable with setting boundaries. Now, let's talk about the guilt and blame. We, all of us, once we have kids, we have an ideal version of the child in front of us. मेरा बच्चा तो डॉक्टर बनेगा, right? मेरा बच्चा तो lawyer बनेगा, and all of these things. Okay, we have an ideal vision that we want to marry, but we want them to marry good Koja people. We want them to have, you know, 3 children. We want them to live like this. We all have expectations and dreams. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with the dream. The problem with the dream is when it turns into an expectation and guilt tripping about how your child is going to live. Because it is their life. You know, what also, remember I talked about how young people's instincts today are much more in line with Islam. You know, I'm talking about my generation. We spent our entire lives kind of saving for our children, right? And children not interested. They're like, don't want your money. I'm happy living in a 1-bedroom apartment in not a very good part of town, right? They have different ideas and things that they want to work with. And so how do we navigate that? The thing is, it's our dream. If it's not being satisfied, we have the full right to grieve it. That is grief. It is okay to grieve a dream that is not going to come true. And of course, here's the thing. You know, the thing is that sometimes when people choose a different spouse, career, we think it reflects on us. You know, again, we take it personally. And this is when we really, and it's an ongoing practice, we have to remind ourselves they are responsible. If we guilt trip them into not living their lives, that's guaranteed to come back to haunt us. Because if somebody does not have control over their own life, you cannot hold them accountable. Say you force somebody to marry somebody, okay? I don't know how often this happens today, but in the old days, it was very common, right? And then that relationship breaks down. Whose issue is it? Whose issue is it? You cannot hold them accountable, right? So, you know, of course, this, right now I'm talking about very basic things, school, career, the choice of spouse, things that are not against basic faith. Okay, I'm just talking about lifestyle, which we would prefer, right? They marry outside the community, they marry whoever they want, they choose a career which is not all of that. We have to understand that, you know, we always talk about parenting as raising kids, okay? I always think of parenting, the minute you become a parent, it is a divine invitation for self-growth. It is going to challenge you and help you grow in ways that nothing else can. Because nothing else will trigger you the way your children do. You cannot be so tied in, take things so personally with any other relationship. So it's okay to care deeply. It's okay to have dreams, to even acknowledge them to yourself. It's not helpful to hold your children accountable for for fulfilling your dreams. And this is why, by the way, now I think it's much better that women are studying, they're having their own lives. Like we know, our parents, grandparents' generation, literally their only identity was that of being a mother. That was their only identity. And therefore, when a child disappointed, the entire world crashed, right? Alhamdulillah, now all of us are free to study, we're free to work, we're free to do many things, most of us. And therefore, our children are not occupying our whole entire universe, which is not unhealthy, and therefore we're also not available sometimes, right, to babysit at a moment's notice. Now let's talk about, when their choices really worry you. So the first thing is, what if their path won't make them happy? So you know that they want a certain career, they want to marry somebody specific, and you can see, obviously, you're older, wiser, you can see it's not going to help them. Okay. First of all, this is an ongoing practice with our spouses and with our children. We need to let go of the person in our heads and learn to love the person in front of us. Whether that is our spouse, whether that is our children, whether that is a parent. Okay. We need to separate culture from religion. If we do that, a lot of things would actually fall into place, right? This idea about, like, Islam, for example, actually encourages intermarriage. There's literally nothing wrong with it. But as a culture, we get really upset, obviously, right? If our child wants to. We also, if we know that the path they're taking is not going to make them happy, right? That involves some really hard conversations. And we need to also remind ourselves that struggle can be a teacher. We cannot stop our children from making every mistake. They have their own path and they will make mistakes. As long as, so here's the thing, when my kids were choosing careers, I said, I have like 3 things that I won't be okay with. Okay, I don't want to say those from a member, but after that, you're literally free to do whatever you want. However, you do need to realize you need to be okay with the lifestyle that comes with that. You cannot choose to be a farmer and then expect dad to write you a check to bail you out. If you want to be a farmer, great, enjoy the journey, right? It will be embarrassing in front of the community, but I'll handle it. But you know what I mean? Like, they have to take responsibility for their choices. Fear 2. What if they're doing marriage or parenting in a different way that I am?
Okay.
But I see lots of grandmothers. Yes. So this tends to be the biggest issue for grandparents, right? They see either their daughter or their daughter-in-law, we all did it, right? We all did it. We consulted. My mom used to tell me, oh, this Dr. Spock that you keep looking at, right? And Dr. Spock hasn't raised 4 children, all of that. And it's true. But I had to do it. I had to make my own mistakes to learn. They are living in a very different time. We don't understand a lot of their angst. And until we don't have honest conversations, we cannot. They are the parents. Who's responsible for those little kids? The parents are, not the grandparents. You've done your bit, okay? And let them now, of course. And another thing, another extreme that I see, especially mother-in-laws go to, is zip your mouth. Don't say anything because kharab lag jayega. You don't know how it should be taken. So here's the thing. Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? If we are seeing something that is not making sense to us, for relationship first, remember we said all that relationship before any guidance, okay? If you've taken the time to build a relationship, it's okay to give your opinion. It's okay. I do not believe that in a close relationship, zipping your mouth is the best way forward. You can speak up and then accept whatever their decision is, which is what we do with kids, right? Like you talk to them, and then if they still want to take a certain course or whatever, you allow them that freedom. Similarly, like even, daughter-in-laws, daughters, even as they grow older, come on. If your mother is saying something, if your mother-in-law is saying something, she is giving an opinion. People have a right to their opinion. That is not interference. It is not interference. If somebody gives you an opinion about something, that is not interference. What is interference is going back to the thing, if you do this, I will not support you financially, because sometimes I hear this, right? The finances are used as holding on to children. This will never work. You can try it, it will never work. Children are going to be resentful and move further away if you use finances as a way to control their life choices. Okay? So, number 3, which is probably the scariest one. What if they're moving away from faith? What if they're actually going down a path of destruction as far as you're concerned? Now, this is something that comes up a lot, it has various degrees. First is, they don't believe, for example, they don't do matal, or they don't want to come to the mosque. Like that's kind of the bottom line, okay? Then it is they're questioning the Shia faith. Then it is they're questioning Islam. Then it is they want to convert to another religion. Then it is they don't believe in God. All of these things do happen, okay? This is obviously a very, 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 it is probably the biggest grief that I see parents going through, the biggest grief. And it is not something that ends. Like just like a death is not something that ends. If you are living with somebody who is disabled or has mental health challenge, that's an ongoing challenge, right? It's not something that ends. Similarly, a situation like this, so be kind to yourself, number one. Number one, be kind to yourself. If your child is coming to you before they've made a decision, because very often what happens is that you get a phone call when the child has announced, okay, that this is happening. Obviously, that is a much different issue. If they are coming to you with questioning, doubts, so I said this, but I'm going to say it again. These are the 4 things that would be helpful for you to tell them, okay? Because here, and when does this happen, by the way? If children have not wrestled with faith, have not actually had the doubts, had the thing, when they leave home, and they will leave home, whether it is for university, for work, when they get married, eventually they will be living, some people know, but most people will be living under a different roof. They will be encountering different ideologies, okay? So their faith will be challenged. If they do not have that, and some people have completely strong faith and they yet choose different faith. This is a very long conversation. What can you tell them? Tell them, do not sit in doubt. It's okay to be doubtful, but convince yourself. Go seek. While you are seeking, ask for guidance. Ask for guidance from Allah. Number 3, be willing to be convinced when the answer comes. Question sincerely, not to justify a conclusion that you have already reached. Because sometimes that does happen, right? And number 4, stay connected while you search. You're not sure of God, you're not sure of Islam. Why don't you just pray? It just takes 5 minutes. Come with me to the mosque. Like, I'm not going to argue with you right now. Just stay minimum connected while you are on this journey. Okay. What does the Quran tell us about this? Okay, 2 very important verses that we need to turn to. In verse 28, chapter 28, verse 56, Allah says, "Surely you cannot guide whom you love, and Allah guides whom He pleases, and He knows best the followers of the right way." We need to remind ourselves the prophets also could not reach the ones that they loved the most. They could not. It is, people do things and we may not ever understand why. And another verse which actually is repeated 3 times in the Quran, and Allah is talking directly to the Prophet ﷺ. He's saying, perhaps you would kill yourself in grief over their footsteps because they believe not in this narration. So what is Allah telling the Prophet? That I see how much you are grieving. It's okay to have that grief. Honor that grief. That lives with you. That is separate from the actions that you're going to take to remain in connection with your children. Yes. And then, to the best of your ability, you stay connected. You stay connected while maintaining your own boundaries. And that boundary will look different for everyone. Many times when this comes up, weddings, they want to have a certain type of wedding which you don't agree with, whether it is serving alcohol, whether it is doing things in a completely different way. And it completely goes against your basic faith. These are not easy conversations. But here's the thing, you have guidance from the Quran. You can do what you can do. One of the things that I recommend to parents all the time, because again, even to adults, we have an obligation of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar in our faith, right? That obligation belongs to our close people we sit with, to a wide variety. It is actually a religious obligation to speak for what is to encourage towards obedience towards God and do what you can to discourage people. Now, of course, there are limits to that, and one of the limits is you need to understand: is this going to be accepted? Is it going to turn them further away? What I recommend is register your dissent for sure. You have to explain or tell them categorically what you agree with and what you don't, what is completely outside your faith. You make that point and then you give it a rest. Because by harping on it, what happens is it drives children further away. Now what they're doing is, instead of actually, wrestling with the faith, answering their confusion, doing all of that, what they're now doing is resisting you. And their energy is being spent fighting you rather than actually wrestling with the questions of faith. And it's not helpful, okay? So lots and lots more to say in this. Maybe if Allah gives us the tawfiq, maybe we will come back to it at some point. But this idea about keeping the door open, this is a serious thing, because in this day, again, 2 generations ago, it was the parents who used to threaten children with disinheriting them. You've heard this word, "aaf kar dena bachon ko," right? Hey, you are no longer my child, and that was kind of a threat that was always on a child's thing. What society is encouraging now, and I will use that word encouraging, is again for children to not tolerate any harm, to look after their own mental well-being, and if that mental well-being necessitates, involves distancing yourself from your parents, even cutting off from your parents, they will be encouraged. They will be encouraged by therapists, they will be encouraged by the wider society, they will certainly be encouraged on social media. I cannot tell you how many social media platforms exist just for this purpose, okay? Now, it's a very complicated and long discussion. There are many reasons, okay? It's not like children just one day decide, I'm cutting off. There are good reasons, there may be abuse in the thing, there may be, what we can do as parents is take responsibility. We need to own up, repair what we can. And children, and tomorrow we will discuss this, so I will leave it there. But to close, I would just like to say that once children have become adults, we need to remind ourselves that our job is done, even if it was imperfect. Guidance is Allah's responsibility, not our responsibility. We can do what we can, and then we need to be kind to ourselves, forgive ourselves for the mistakes we make, ask Allah for forgiveness, ask our children for forgiveness if we have not done, and we'll talk about apologizing, inshallah, in another lecture.